Welcome to Real Vision Crypto. I'm Ash Bennington. I'm joined today by Richard Kim, General Partner at Galaxy Interactive, to talk about gaming, social tokens, AI, Web3, and so much more. Richard, welcome to Real Vision Crypto.
Thanks for having me.
So, Richard, you've had a really interesting life. We were talking a little bit off camera. You're someone who could have done just about anything, and you wound up in the crypto space. Tell us a little bit about your background before you got to Galaxy.
I started my career in the heart of the financial crisis in '07 on the legal side, where I worked at Cleary Gottlieb right out of law school, which is a big law firm in New York, focused on derivatives and regulation. Which was an interesting time during peak financial crisis. It was an environment where I was thrown into, thinking about questions like what happens when Goldman, issues an early termination notice against Morgan Stanley, which obviously didn't happen, but was very close to happening. And so analyzing the implications of these kind of cascading defaults and such was something that occupied the first year of my career. After a few years of being a lawyer, I realized that was kind of like being the world's greatest expert at literally a paragraph or two of the bankruptcy code. Kind of like, knowing how to fix an incredibly arcane part of a car, but not knowing how cars run. So in 2010, I moved over to the JP Morgan initially on the legal side to kind of broaden my horizons a bit. And by 2012, I'd moved over to the FX business to be a business manager in FX options. Over the next few years, I essentially became the COO of FX and emerging markets trading at JP, and was quite involved in the electronic trading franchise in particular, and really seeing through the changes that were necessary to bring a spot trading desk and kind of old world FX franchise into a kind of electronic first regime. And so I think a lot of those lessons were quite interesting to me in looking at crypto, where I first moved over to Goldman in 2015 to do a similar role as I had at JP. But by 2017, I started to look into crypto, mainly with an eye towards figuring out how to get Goldman trading crypto, because to me it was just another FX pair at the end of the day, settled differently. I was surprised in 2017 to see the intensity of the negative reaction to that from a, call it, internal business development standpoint. By the end of the year, had really morphed quite substantially in line with the rise in crypto markets that year.
There's probably this sort of equal skepticism on the outside of people in the crypto community, in the Bitcoin community, especially, I would imagine, in 2017, who were probably not thrilled about Goldman getting into the business.
It's interesting. I'd say at the time, there was so much speculative fervor, particularly by the end of the year, that everyone was looking for any headline that would propel the rally, basically. So I'd say it was actually pretty universally positive, with a lot of anticipation on what that offering might look like.
Yeah.
I remember being on the kickoff call and having 157 compliance people kind of attend that first meeting, and I had the general counsel at the kind of corporate level call me and say, you got to manage this process better, because everyone wanted to be part of a movement, right? I mean, crypto was the thing. And then 2017, when you get used to these zero-sum markets where you're talking about pips and fractions of this or that, to talk about crypto was really captivating a lot of the minds back then. And so, I was really proud of that initiative, and I think Goldman could have actually stood up something pretty quickly. But I left in the first quarter of 2018 to join Mike Novogratz at Galaxy Digital, initially as the COO, but within the first few months of 2018, eventually by the end of 2018, joining full time on the venture side with my current partner Sam. And together we're the two GPs at Galaxy Interactive, which is a $650 million franchise, completely focused on the interactive entertainment space, and this idea that our digital identities have become just as real as our physical ones.
Let's zoom the camera out for a moment. For people who aren't familiar with Galaxy Digital, tell us a little bit about what Galaxy Digital does, and then how Galaxy Interactive fits into that schema.
So I guess let me rewind to when I first joined Galaxy Digital and the reason I joined. I mean, to me, it was a really interesting mix of kind of startup-like potential. When I joined, there were a couple dozen people. Now we're in the hundreds. We had just raised, a couple hundred million to essentially go public on the Toronto Venture Stock Exchange, which didn't end up happening until I think it was August of 2018, sometime in Q3. By which point the markets look substantially different from when the funds were initially raised in the first quarter. So it was an interesting environment to be thrown into, the kind of all the pre-revenue frenetic nature of a startup, but with a lot of the kind of institutional and compliance infrastructure of a public company. The idea behind Galaxy, which has always made a lot of conceptual sense to me, is this is your beta to the idea of the institutional version of crypto hitting mainstream, right? So that includes a trading business, an asset management business, a banking business, and a principal investments arm. Within the kind of principal investment slash asset management side of things,
for people who are not familiar with the traditional financial space, that's a huge amount of coverage that you guys are doing. I think Steve Kurtz said it in some ways it's like Goldman and BlackRock together, because you guys have the sort of the banking side of the business, or the plumbing side of the business on the one hand, and on the other you have asset management and a venture arm. I mean, it's just an extraordinary amount of space that you guys are covering.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the access side of things, but then there's also just the synergy side of things. So, I think over the last few months in particular, it's been gratifying to me to see that finally realized. From a lot of the early ideas 3.5 years ago or 4 years ago to now actually being implemented in practice. So, on the venture side, my partner Sam had raised the $325 million Galaxy EOS VC fund, which started as a ecosystem fund focused on opportunities on the EOS blockchain. And one of the kind of early observations we had in looking at the sector was, to the extent the EOS blockchain in particular was going to be a blockchain that had an impact in the world. The best shot of that happening was to invest in the applications and founders who were most likely to make a practical impact in the world, as opposed to just talking about a blockchain pitch. And so we quickly honed in on the interactive entertainment sector being pretty interesting because of the foundational unlock that blockchain provided in providing a fungible layer for virtual goods to be traded, exchanged, and for you to finally own monetary value in a lot of these gaming ecosystems where I'd say there was a lot of sentimental value, as evidenced by the fact that gaming is a $175 billion a year market. There's a lot of consumption value, but not a lot of investment value, right? Arguably, the ROI of buying a Fortnite skin is, in pure monetary terms, minus 100%. Now, obviously, players don't look at it that way.
Right.
And if anything, the crypto world has gone too far in the direction of, oh, you're getting no value for all these purchases in game. I mean, that's a pretty ridiculous statement because of the consumption value. But the interesting thing to consider is whether you can get all of that entertainment slash consumption value out of virtual goods while also tapping into real world value in a way that the extrinsic motivations of doing so don't essentially completely swallow a lot of the intrinsic joy you get from this activity. And that's probably worth exploring later on.
Yeah, that's a sort of a fascinating point. There have been all of these studies that show that there's this sort of almost an inverse relationship between external motivation and internal motivation. Sometimes it's a fascinating idea. But before we transition to that, I want to bring up this graphic that you guys have at Galaxy Interactive that shows the scope of this space. Obviously, you can see it on your screen right now. This is something that is sort of a kind of complex, richly ramified space that you guys are thinking about. Walk us through this image and explain what we're seeing.
What you see on this slide is really the sectors that we've invested in as a fund. Now about 4 years into three and a half into our investing history, we've invested in 97 companies, um, and deployed. Let's see, we've deployed nearly 500 million into these companies, and really the broad thesis here is that the rise of the self-sovereign digital native is driving one of the biggest consumer TAM expansions in the modern internet era.
Hey, if you like this clip, be sure to check out the full interview and more only on realvision.com/crypto. It's 100% free. Sign up now.